So, Patricia, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us today. I think you were working at the AIRE Centre a couple of years ago as a legal researcher. I think you trained originally in law in Portugal. So I was wondering if you could say a little bit about your sort of earlier background in Portugal and what brought you into the law in the first place, if that's possible.
Sure, absolutely, and thank you, Paul, for creating this opportunity for me to be here today as well. And it's really a pleasure to go back to the AIRE Centre days and to have a chance to talk about this. As to your question about what brought me into law, essentially, I didn't necessarily go into law with a specific intention. I was always very drawn to social causes and to human rights and very much involved in local activism. But although my skills and interests were very widened, but someone pointed me in the direction of law when I was 17. And I think it was only during the course of my studies that I really realized the power of the law to not only secure protection, but also as a tool for change. And I think towards the end of the degree, I became more aware of the distance that there is between those responsible for creating laws and for implementing them, and those that the laws effectively affect. And it was realizing this gap that I also came to the conclusion that I did have the knowledge and the skills, and I was in a position where I could actually create a connection. And that's when I decided to commit to working in human rights law a bit later.
That's fascinating. And do you remember how you came across the AIRE Centre originally?
Yes, sure. So I did study in Portugal first, and although I had studied in European international law, I was never exposed to how EU law was applied in practice. And I moved to London with the hopes of trying to find a job in the human rights sector. And so I came across the AIRE Centre as one of the organizations, of course, leading some of the work in EU law. And I think, and my move to London was quite bold because I had always studied abroad. I didn't have any connections and any network here in London. And I think the fact that the AIRE Centre is always looking for to collaborate with people with diverse backgrounds and with knowledge from different jurisdictions was really quite key in providing this entry point. And so when I started at the AIRE Centre, I was an intern, and that was the key and the great opportunity that then unlocked so many others after that.
And you worked as a sort of legal researcher, I think, at the AIRE Centre. Is there a particular project or experience that you had while you were working for the AIRE Centre that really sort of stands out for you?
That's quite a difficult question, I think. I started as a legal researcher for the Western Balkans. So I was working with Katrina and Biljana a lot on rule of law, but then I was also very much drawn to work on children's rights with Nuala, and I worked on European litigation with Markella. And so I did work in several themes. And I think the fact that I was so exposed to several team members within the AIRE Centre and worked in very different areas was really the big part of the experience. And when I think back about my AIRE Centre days, I don't recall one specific experience that happened, but it's really this feeling of everybody working in a very collaborative way and always absorbing the knowledge of the more senior staff within the AIRE Centre, and the general exchange of ideas that is constantly happening, and this pursuit to solve another legal issue and to advance a bit more in the protection of human rights. I think everybody comes together for each little project and for each little case, and that is what I take with me the most, I think.
Brilliant. And since leaving the AIRE Centre, you're now working at the European Network on Statelessness. And I think you must have joined around the time that sort of COVID meant it's quite difficult to work in person much. So it must have been quite an interesting time. But do you want to tell us a bit about your current role and what your typical day kind of looks like now, if there is one?
Sure, of course. I'm working as a legal policy coordinator at the European Network on Statelessness, as you mentioned. So currently I'm supporting law and policy development. So that includes working with the EU, working with the UN, and working with governments throughout Europe to change the laws and to effectively implement them, but also in compliance with international standards. So we do advocacy. We also work on raising awareness and raising the capacity of actors, of public authorities, as well as lawyers in the judiciary. And we also conduct human rights advocacy before the UN treaty bodies. And more recently, we've started launching a project, particularly with the AIRE Centre, to continue our litigation work together. And so we've also been increasing a lot our capacity to draft, for example, third-party interventions before the European courts, and also to improve the training that we're providing on statelessness to lawyers and judges. And we're also working to produce more and more thematic briefings and legal briefings, specifically addressing some focus issues on statelessness. And so a typical day for me, I mean, I don't think there is actually a typical day.
I don't think anyone I've asked that to has said they've got one. I still quite like asking, but no, I've seen a couple of your. I've read the blog you did on the VMA Obsthena case at the CJAU, so I know that's come across some of your work, which is really interesting. And it's great that you're carrying on the work with the AIRE Centre as well. So some of those connections, I guess you're still working with some of the people that you know from your time at the AIRE Centre.
Yeah, okay.
I think my last question really is if you've got any particular tips for the sort of current interns who are working at the AIRE Centre, any particular recommendations for them?
I'm not sure I have something in specific. I think it really comes with the attitude that you bring towards any exposure to these kinds of experiences. And the more you absorb and the more you seek opportunities that are very much in line with your passions, the more you'll excel at it. And I think then the opportunities escalate from there as well. I think I was very lucky to be exposed to children's rights, asylum and migration, to rule of law, and to all of these different areas in the AIRE Centre. And this turned out to be extremely important for my work on statelessness as well, because it's such a cross-cutting and intersectional issue. It's really important to have knowledge of all of these topics. And I think the exposure through the AIRE Centre, as well as all the additional experience that I gained specifically on third-party interventions, for example, all of those bits really come together nicely in the work I'm doing nowadays. And then also just carrying with me the contacts and carrying with me all of the people that I met at the AIRE Centre. I'm still in touch with some of those that in the meantime have left, but also with new faces that came into the AIRE Centre as well. And maintaining these connections is really for the benefit of all of us. So those are quite a few tips, I think. But yeah, do stay engaged and passionate, I think. That does help a lot in this type of work as well. That can sometimes be quite frustrating, but eventually rewarding.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much again for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you, Paul. That was such a pleasure, really.